The Senate has passed a stopgap spending measure to avert a government shutdown. The legislation now heads over to the House for a vote later this afternoon. Senators passed the measure extending the government funding deadlines to March 1st and March 8th by a vote of 77 to 18. If the House approves the bill, it will be sent to the president's desk and presumably signed into law. Funding for some agencies currently runs out, though, at midnight tomorrow. Others are funded through February 2nd. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now from the Capitol. So, Scott, it's passed the Senate. What is the likelihood that the bill passes the House today?
Very, very likely, although they're cutting it close to the deadline. This is not a Herculean accomplishment. They're just extending government funding for 6 weeks. Should be an easy lift in the U.S. House. We expect them to have a large group of Democrats, if not unanimous support of Democrats, and a sufficient number of Republicans to get this done. Keeps all government spending where it is now through March 1st and March 8th. This is like the third of a trilogy of movies. This happened on September 30th. It happened again in November, and it's happening again now. They just passed short-term deals to extend the time frame in which they can negotiate how much to spend on government in 2024. You're supposed to do that the year before. This should have been done in 2023, but instead these negotiations now will run right into March.
And Scott, when we were talking yesterday, you predicted that the snow and the cold weather would actually have an impact on lawmakers coming to an agreement on and passing this legislation. How much is that actually playing into the decisions that we're seeing on the Hill?
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that I was indeed correct. It's always good to underscore that when you can. Other than like a snowmobile course, this is the only place that speeds up with snow. There is overnight and Friday afternoon snow expected in Washington, D.C., which expedited the time frame because members of Congress, to put it charitably, Lana, are disinclined to hang out in Washington when their return flights home are in jeopardy. So things sped up. The negotiations completed today to get this short-term measure passed, but really, the bigger negotiations are the bigger issue. What is going to be done to get something through the end of the year? Or will this type of kicking the can down the curb continue throughout 2024? If it does, there may be electoral and political consequences for those in charge, Democrats in the Senate and Republicans in the House.
Well, I want to talk about those potential consequences, but even before we get into that, let's talk about the bigger issues, because as you say, Scott, this is kicking the can. Yes, it's good that the lights are being kept on, that agencies will be able to function, that Americans who are counting on the government to get checks will get those, but there's still these big issues. Aid for Ukraine, aid for Israel, and the southern border. Where are we on any of those negotiations?
One House Democrat told me this does not bode well. What's happening here today does not bode well for those larger negotiations. If it took this much time and there was no closure to just keeping the government funded, how do you tackle these thorny, nettlesome issues like immigration reform, something so difficult it tends to happen just once in a generation in Congress, or Ukraine aid, when there are dozens of House Republicans who, no matter what, don't support any further funding of Ukraine? There has to be the matter of getting money to Israel, billions of dollars. The negotiations continue in the U.S. Senate on this, but I spoke today with a number of Democrats and asked a question of the House Democratic leader. Do you think anything that passes the Senate will see the light of day in the Republican-controlled House? And all of them equivocated. There is no certainty any of this gets through anytime soon.
And Scott, I wanted, as promised, to go back to that issue about political consequences that some lawmakers may face. Who's next are on the chopping block about this?
I think, to a degree, you have to watch where the negotiations move. Once they conclude in the Senate, there has been a bipartisan group working seemingly collaboratively and cordially on negotiating immigration reform. That's a hot-button issue. It's hard to have any collaborative, cordial conversations on hot-button issues at this moment in time, but they've succeeded. But if something passes, this goes to the Speaker of the House. Will he let it go on the floor, whether it has the votes or not? Because there's a flank of House Republicans who want nothing to do with a Senate compromise on immigration. They don't even want to have the vote held. They will pressure Speaker Mike Johnson not to hold the vote. And Lana, this is increasingly complex because there are any number of Democrats, progressives, who don't like the idea of cutting a deal with Republicans on immigration. They may balk at this too. It's a real treacherous road ahead. And to extend the snow metaphor, a political blizzard awaits this particular issue.
When it comes to snow and predicting Congress's movements, Scott MacFarlane always with the tea. Thank you.
Thank you.